Valuation was greedy.
I wouldn't say greedy. I'd say that it fell in with the rent. Well, it matched the rent that was on the subject property. Also tallied up with what the wider basics properties in the area. On hindsight, perhaps it would have been better to try and find some more rental evidence in the direct locality, even if it was tricky to find. Most of them are connected parties or freehold, to support that rather than using one rent.
Thank you. I also see that you talk about standing back. Are you familiar with any case law that supports that view of standing back and looking at a valuation?
I can't recall it at the moment.
No. Okay. Thank you. I don't know. I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier because I was a little confused, and you've sort of half cleared it up for me. This is an industrial unit that's got a suspended ceiling in. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah.
That's what the photographs show, and that's what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, very strange.
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure on the history of that, but quite a few of the tiles have been removed because it was.
Yeah, I can see that from the photograph. What is that trunking that appears in there with the photographs on page 23? Sorry.
That's okay. Norfolk Construction.
Is that either stainless steel or aluminium trunking?
I believe so.
I presume that's not the sprinkler system because it's too large in diameter.
No, I can't actually make it out from the photograph.
No.
But,
it's on
are the offices air-conned?
They're not aircon, no.
No, only it appears also in there, going along.
Oh, right, I see what you mean, yeah.
That.
Maybe an air ventilation, I didn't notice when I was down on the site. But,
which leads me to the question is, was there any plant and machinery on the premises?
There wasn't any. There wasn't any problem, obviously, with the sprinkler system.
The sprinkler system.
That was all that was. That was the only plant machinery.
Because I presume this is the same property.
Yeah.
There's the trunking again appearing.
Yeah.
I just wondered.
Is it a
what
chimney
it was.
for a boiler?
Well, that's what I wondered.
Could possibly. There was a boiler room.
Okay.
You can put it on my plan as well. There was a.
Well, I won't pursue it too far, but it's just puzzled me what that was, because I thought it might be plant and machinery.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Right then, Michael. Now, just general question about the appeal. Who submits the proposals? Is that something that you do, or is it somebody else at CVS?
I wouldn't personally submit the proposals. No, I would often advise when that goes in. We've got a client service department that deals with that.
Right.
But I'm aware of the process.
Okay. When does a proposal become an appeal?
When it's acknowledged by the valuation office.
Right. What stage do you get your hands on it?
At the stage it's programmed, acknowledged and then programmed with the valuation office.
Okay. You said that you did a risk assessment for your inspection. How did you do that?
I was speaking with the client before attending the site, whether there are any hazards I should be aware of before attending. I then logged that in my Outlook before attending the site and took protective clothing, or high-vis jacket, hard hat, and steel-toed boots with me.
So were there risks requiring that PPE?
There wasn't any risk that would have required that. Though I did wear my high-vis when I was on site. The steel-toed boots weren't required.
Right. Okay. What is a high-vis jacket for?
It's just to make it obviously visible, so goods, forklifts,
Okay.
boarding lifts.
What's the rebus sic stantibus mean?
As it stands.
Right. Okay. Is it always as it stands, or can any changes be envisaged within the concept?
Well, it's any structural changes can't be undertaken underneath that hypothesis. Any minor alterations, partition walls and such.
Okay. Do you think replacing sprinkler heads and removing a suspended ceiling could be viewed as minor?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that reinstating the heads would likely the fact that we can actually sawn off would require quite a bit of substantial investment, and I believe the valuation officer agreed with me due to the offer of reducing them in the statement of case.
Okay. In terms of the pipe network to the sprinklers, what colour were the pipes?
They were grey.
Grey. What colour are pipes usually that carry water?
I wouldn't know.
Okay. Now, what were the security problems that the poor old tenant was suffering?
Was vandalism, break-ins, and yeah, those are the two main things.
Right. Okay. What was the construction of the suspended ceilings?
Metal frame with polyester tiles.
Right. Okay. How do the differences in the allowances for the security problems vary? I mean, why have some got 10 and some got 20%?
Obviously, I wasn't able to find out the complete background, but from previous cases, I would assume that it was due to the severity and the frequency of the issues,
Right.
and whether they're reflected in the rents that were achieved at those sites.
Right. Okay. If you look at your valuation on page 10 of your critical analysis, we can see that the line entries for the offices vary. Why have they got different rates on them?
So part of the office space was built onto the side,
Yeah.
whereas the lower rate was partitioned off from the main warehouse space.
Okay, so what was there a difference in specification and quality then?
Yeah, the quality was lower and the natural light was poorer on the
Right.
area.
Okay. Now you also mentioned the hierarchy of evidence. Why is a new letting the best evidence?
As it's tenant coming fresh to the scene, and the willing landlord and the willing tenant.
Right. Okay. Now on page 22, there is a lovely picture of some weeds.
Yeah.
What are these?
I wouldn't know. No, not sure.
Okay. Do you think you should know? Are there any invasive species? Could you tell if there were?
I'm aware of there are certain species
Right.
of plant that can hinder that.
Okay. So, well, I'll tell you, that's elderflower,
No.
and it's not an invasive species. But what would you be looking for if at the plants?
Knotweed.
Yeah, and what does it look like?
It's got diamond-shaped leaves.
And what colour's the stem? Looks like you're in growing season there.
Green.
Right, okay. Thank you, Mr. Clayton. That'll do for your critical analysis. If you'd like to just put your visual aid on the floor. We're now going to move on and talk about the general questioning time. Norman's going to start with that.
Right, thank you. I'm going to start with local taxation, if I may. I see from your template that you say you're aware of the BCIS indices and the VOA cost guide for P&M. Could you tell me what the depreciation percentages are, please?
5%. 5%.
Thank you. You say that you've inspected and measured and discussed a range of properties, including retail, office and industrial premises, in addition to public houses and hotels. You also mentioned contractors-based assessments, such as an airfield. How would you value an airfield?
In that case, there's an Upminster. There was a replacement cost placed on the workshops, the obsolescence value then applied. There's also then the development land, or the value of the land, and then it was factored in for cost, the fees, 9% fees, which to get to a value.
Again, could you give any cases on that type of valuation, if not necessarily airfields, something similar to that?
I can't know.
No. Okay. You also talk about a mezzanine floor. Would a mezzanine floor be plant and machinery?
No, tenants improvements.
How does the valuation office treat mezzanine floors?
They treat them at 70% value underneath that and 50% above if it's used for storage.
Mhm. Would it make any difference if they were fixed to the structure or not?
It would if they're freestanding, then they could be argued that it's racking rather than it's permanently fixed.
Okay, thank you. You say you valued a number of public houses and hotels using receipts-based example, and you mention, I see from here, hotel at Clacton-on-Sea, using DBUs. What are DBUs, please?
It's a double bed unit.
Right. Does that include ensuite or not?
There is usually a factor for en-suites or ones
Right.
without.
So how does that square then with the profits and loss accounts? Because you told me you valued on DBUs. Well, how does that square with the profit and loss account?
You'd get the fair and table trade over 3 years over ABD, and then work that back to the rooms to get a DBU rate.
So how would you define DBUs then?
A DBU would be a double bed, a standard
Yes,
double bedroom.
but it's a little bit more than that I'm looking for.
Right.
Okay, that's all right. You say that you valued a number of properties on the contractor's basis and used the cost guides. You said cost guides. What were the cost guides that you used?
It was mainly the valuation of this cost guide, and again referring to BCIS.
Did you, and use BCIS, were you able to obtain actual costs? Or did you think of obtaining actual costs?
Well, indeed, in terms of contractors with rating appeals, I adopted the cost used by the valuation office.
What would you deal with? How would you proceed then if you found something that you couldn't find in the VOA cost guide?
I would then carry out external research myself personally for costs around the valuation date.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I see you make a comment of the land values reduced to agricultural levels, yes. You also mention the City Duck case. Could you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, that was regarding the mode and category of occupation for a retail unit in a shopping centre that was valued as a pub. And it was held that it was due to the structural change that taking place, it would be able to revert back to a retail unit and should be valued as a pub.
Thank you. You mention also that you've advised colleagues following issues of invalidity and also on assessments currently benefiting from Section 44A. Could you tell me a little bit about Section 44A, please, and the properties you've dealt with?
Section 44A relates to MT rates relief. One of them was a ex-library in Hertford, in Hertfordshire, where the client was benefiting from Section 44A relief, and advised that it wouldn't be worthwhile submitting an appeal on that section as there was no liability to the client.
Okay, thank you. You also mention J. Lang and Sons versus Kingswood Assessment Committee. Why is that an important case? Okay, that's all right, thank you. I'd like to move on to landlord and tenant, if I could, please. You say that you understand assignment, subletting and alienation. I'm going to ask you, what's alienation, please?
Alienation is the subletting of the unit.
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to move on and say I see from your template that you've carried out rent reviews for clients, example being a retail unit in Harrow, a mini supermarket in a parade. Could you tell me how you went about that, please?
Yeah, so that was a rent review, as you said, in the parade of shops. It was overdue as well. It was the rent review was from 2009. It was nearing arbitration when it was handed to myself to deal with. I then obtained the some rents in the parade that were agreed around that date. Obviously, before all that, I did go and measure the resi unit to find out the area in terms of Zone A. Then used to devalue the rents on those agreed lettings in the parade, applied that to my own unit, and put that evidence forward to the opposite surveyor for the council, and also then agreed a 7.5% allowance for restricted use in the lease to Minimark.
What was the lease clause that gave that restriction? What did it restrict it to?
It was restricted to use as a mini supermarket and nothing else.
Do you know if the leases on the other units were similarly restrictive?
I was not aware if they were, though there was a general A1 parade. So I would
Did you
assume
see
not.
the sites of the leases of the other properties?
I didn't see the leases of
No.
the other properties.
Okay, thank you. Moving on that, you mentioned you can. I'd like to move on now to conflict of avoidance. Sorry, which is my next topic because I'm conscious of time. Conflict avoidance typically involves avoiding the difficulties of, says he, trying to find it quickly. I'm not getting there. Yes. Am I there? Yes, got it. You say that you understand the difference between surveyors acting as expert witness and advocate. Which do you think is the better approach to the client?
In terms of...
If you had the option of both. I realise most leases don't, but...
So acting as both...
If you had the option of picking either, which do you think's the better approach?
You said expert witness and advocate, didn't you?
Sorry, I meant, my apologies, I meant, I put two questions together. Expert witness and advocate, what's the difference in the roles?
Okay, so yeah, the expert witness is duty to the court, whereas the advocacy's duties to the client.
Right, thank you, that's what I was after. Right, you talked about the rent review in Harrow, which was close to arbitration. Is that the shop we've just discussed? I thought it was. I'll move on from that because we've already discussed that. You say you've compiled numerous expert reports for the valuation tribunal and gathered and collated facts. Can you tell me about another valuation tribunal other than the one in the critical analysis and that one we've just explored?
Yeah, so one was a amusement arcade in Clacton-on-Sea, where it was currently valued as an A1 use, £400. There's a number in the locality, larger units in at £150, and I contended that there should be 100.
Was it described as shop and premises?
No, it was described as an amusement arcade. In the description, it was restricted to that in the lease, and also obviously as it's an arcade, that was a sui generis, so there was no permitted change.
Thank you. I'd like to move on then. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. You also talk about in conflict avoidance. Obviously, you appreciate in negotiation with the VO, it can end up at VT or even beyond. How do you approach a negotiation with the VT, with the VO? How much preparation do you do?
Before starting negotiations, so obviously I'll do the research before inspect the property, to calculate the areas, look at comparable assessments in the locality for any end allowances or any issues in that respect. Look at the rental evidence as well on the subject property and the wider area on comparable properties. I then collate all that into an email, send it off to the valuation officer first, and then obviously follow that up with a phone call then if the kids don't get any response, or then go from there.
Thank you. Do you at any period while this is going on, because obviously this is taking place over time, do you ever have cause or occasion to stand back and consider your approach?
Well, there's always a stand back and look approach before I send any contentions to the valuation officer, and obviously then in response to their points. So yeah, before responding, obviously we'll stand back and look at that and judge whether the facts of the valuation are correct.
When you've received the valuation office statement of case, obviously yours has already been done, do you use that as a template to judge how strong their negotiating strength is?
I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would look at the evidence contained in their statement of case. A lot of the time, the exchange statement of case doesn't actually, in my opinion, show that they're offering the true value on the property, and so further negotiations needed.
Fair enough, thank you. I want to move on, because I'm conscious of time, to building pathology, if I may. You say in building pathology, in your template, I see you are aware of rot, both wet and dry. What is the difference between wet rot and dry rot, please?
Wet rot is usually caused by damp, whereas dry rot's caused by fungus.
A fungus, okay. Could you recognise each?
Yeah, I believe I could.
Okay. And what do you mean by pest attack? Can you give me an instance?
Well, pest attack would be normally insect, although it could include rodents as well, sort of attack on electrical systems.
Yes. What about pest attack from insects? What sort of insects are you thinking about?
Can't think of any.
No. All right. Thank you. I'll move you on, because time is short. You talk about taking clear notes on inspection together with photographs and using damp meters and boroscopes for cavity wall instructions. Tell me when you would use a damp meter and when you'd use a boroscope, please.
A damp meter would be when damp could be noticed, or not necessarily all the time, but and also boroscopes would be for checking whether there's insulation or the quality of insulation in a cavity wall.
Thank you. You mention building defects in your template as at a nursery in Hemel Hempstead because you thought subsidence was taking place. Could you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, there was, attending the site, there was some fractures on one of the wall elevation walls, and that led me to believe that there may have been subsidence on one side of the elevation of the building. I then refer that to a specialised building surveyor to investigate.
Was there any excavations or any tests done to determine what it was the cause?
I'm aware of, though there could be
Okay.
tests done to it. Yeah.
Thank you. How would that affect a rating assessment, do you think?
If there was subsidence present, then that could lead to potential deletion from the list if it's deemed to be uninhabitable.
Mm-hmm. What happens if it wasn't? If they were still occupying it and it was still with defective aspects?
It would just be assumed that it's assumed to be in good repair. So if it's not, it's to be valued in the rating list.
Are you aware of any cases on that sort of area? No. Okay. Thank you. You mention also in the same page about a schedule of condition. What's a schedule of condition?
Schedule condition is when a release is taken that outlines quality specification and any defects on the property.
Okay, thank you. And the final topic I've got to look at is inspection. Okay, I think it's back here. Yes. How would you ascertain if there were any hazards in a property you were anticipating inspecting in the near future?
I'd speak to the client before attending the site, see if there's anything he was aware of that I should also be aware of. It could also time to take other investigations, such as looking on Google Street View at the property, the style, the age, and any quality issues or defects that would be common with that type of building.
Okay, thank you. Tell me a little bit about how you go about planning an inspection.
So before an inspection, I speak to the client to arrange access, clean the date and time, which will log in my Outlook, then take any protective clothing that will be needed, and I'll take a mobile phone as well.
Thank you. You say that you've created valuation reports, an example being seen at an office in Oxford Street which had comfort cooling installed. Can you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, that was a said office assessment in London. Currently had a 5-10% uplift for comfort cooling, for full air conditioning. Upon attending the site, I noted that it was only comfort cooling, so only provided heating and cooling, not humidification and purification, and therefore the under the rating policy or rating guide work, that would be 5% uplift, not 10%.
Would you see air conditioning as plant and machinery?
That would be plant and machinery.
How would you treat it for valuation, therefore, if... I know it hasn't got air conditioning, I appreciate it, but let's pretend for a minute it had. How would you approach it from the valuation if it's plant and machinery, as you've just told me?
Well, you get the... Not 100% sure, but I would assume that you'd get the replacement cost and then decapitalise that to get to a value equivalent to including the market rent.
Okay, thank you. You said you've taken a number of inspections to ascertain quality, design and specification, and you mentioned a golf course. How would you value a golf course?
The golf course, for racing purposes, golf course are either course value, ascertained through rental evidence, and then also a club, and then a value applies to the clubhouse, and also then a lower value usually on the greenkeeper sheds.
So how would you inspect it, therefore?
Well, with the inspection of the buildings, I'd measure that to NIA. With the golf course, with the course itself, I would ascertain the length of the course, the par, obviously then look for any issues in the site, and I also measure the greenkeeper sheds as well, internally. You
also, I think, say here that there was flooding issues.
Yep. Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
How did you ascertain the extent and frequency of that?
Looking at the online at the flood risk of the area.
Thank you. Thank you. And I see you also looked at a comparable property. Thank you. I'd also now like to take you talk about the parade of shops in Harrow, and I think that's the one I've previously asked you questions on for the rent review. You say here, which is something I didn't deal with before, but I now would like to return to, about the layout issues and the number of structural walls. Was it a double unit?
It was a double unit, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that's what that meant.
That's right, yeah.
Presumably, were there openings in this structural wall between the two units?
Yeah, there was an opening at the back, about 2 metres, and again at the front.
So like large doorways,
yeah.
In other words, yes. Which must have made that quite an inconvenient layout, I presume.
Yeah, there was another in the there was one other double unit in the parade. I did mention that to the landlord surveyor.
Thank you. That was my next question. You also say you took an inspection of a number of residential properties in Derby for asset valuations. How would you approach those? Because that's not for rating.
No. So for those, it would be done to the project with a comparable method and also the investment method as they were let at the time.
Thank you. I've got one last question, if I may.
Okay, just one.
Just one, thank you. Can you tell me anything about the Energy Act of 2011?
I can't recall anything on that at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay, right then, let's talk about valuation, Michael. What is the definition of investment value?
The investment value would be for investment. I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, what about market value?
Market value would be the passing rent on the property, usually.
What about market rent then?
But that'd be, yeah, I think I got it wrong there.
Okay, so what's the difference in market rent and market value?
Market value would be the capital value. I think the market rent would be the passing rent.
Right. So does that lead you on to thinking what investment value might be?
That'd be, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about yields then. What's the difference between net initial yield and gross initial yield?
Not too sure.
Okay. What was the last update to the Red Book?
2014.
Right. Let's talk about something you've actually done now then. You valued a substation in Basildon. How exciting. Talk me through that valuation.
Well, that was a DRC. It was just mainly getting the value of the land and then getting the replacement cost of the machinery installed and then decapitalising that.
Okay. What's the critique of that method?
Well, the cost doesn't equal value, and it's a method of last resort in that respect.
Okay, so why would you use DRC for a substation?
Because there's no rental evidence or any comparables in the direct locality that would aid in that valuation.
Okay. Now, you have done some investment valuation of some residential stuff in Derby. What were the sort of yields that you used there?
They're in the region of sort of 6 to 7%.
Right. Okay. What type of yields are they?
That'd be equated yield.
Right. How did you work out that it should be 6 or 7%?
Well, it's a range between 6 and 7 from looking at capital values on freehold sales and rents obtained on those.
So how did you get from a freehold sale and knowing what its rent is to knowing what the yield you should use?
So, for example, if I had a unit that was just on the side there, so if I had a unit that was sold for 200,000, obviously then you then ascertain the passing rent on that property, and then divide the rent in from the value to that gives you the yield.
Okay, and is that a gross or a net yield?
That would be a gross yield.
Okay, so you do know what a gross yield is. Okay, now you've also done a residual valuation. So what were the inputs into that valuation?
So the residual was the piece of land. So you'd have the gross development value less the gross development costs. So that would be sort of fees, materials, and then to give you to a gross profit.
Right. Okay. What assumptions did you make with respect to finance?
That it would be the finance would be staggered, so you wouldn't have the full amount
Right,
up front.
S-curve. Okay.
Yeah.
What rate did you assume?
6%.
Okay. What was your advice to client?
The advice was to sell the land as the profit would be relatively small in comparison to the by selling the plot of land.
Were there any planning requirements for this? Section 106 or affordable housing or anything like that, or SIL?
I can't recall.
Do you know what SIL is?
I don't know.
What are the changes to SDLT that you advise the client about? Is this the same chap? It's also Derby.
Yep, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So what's changed about SDLT? Forgotten.
Yeah.
Okay. One more on valuation then. If you want to do asset valuations after you're qualified, what must you be?
You must register with IVS. I think.
Pardon?
You must be registered as a registered valuer.
Register valuer. Okay. Right. Let's talk about property records, but I might come back to valuation a little bit anyway. Now, you mentioned flood risk and checking online. Where did you look for that?
I can't remember the exact website, but there's a government agency that deals with flood risks and shows. You can get an aerial photograph of the area, and it's highlighted in blue on the severity of the historic flooding and potential risks.
Okay. What other due diligence activities do you carry out for evaluation that involve interrogating property records?
In terms of due diligence, I can't.
So, well, I mean, for example, with rating, when you're about to start dealing with an appeal, your due diligence would involve checking certain information.
Right.
What do you check?
We're checking the evaluation. Check this in terms of engagement. You check the idea of the valuer, of the client, base of value, the identification of the property. Sort of.
Would you try and get your hands on the lease?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Now, what's the point of the Data Protection Act?
It's to protect personal data.
Personal data. Whose personal data? Everybody's, or?
I'd say everyone's individual personal data.
What about dead people? Do they have a right to be protected?
I can't recall if that covers that, but I would just assume so.
Right.
Maybe
Okay.
not.
All right. Well, let's assume that you've been very naughty and not protecting personal data, which I'm sure CVS would never do. Who would the ratepayer complain to?
They could complain to, the complaint to CVS if it's a personal issue. And
further above that?
be a government department.
Okay.
Yeah, that one.
How did you use the Gord plans in Billericay?
That was when I was looking at the case development tribunal, and it was to look at the layout of the unit in comparison to adjoining ones. As I obviously wasn't able to measure
Did
those
you
up.
plot the comparables on as well?
Yeah, it was a whole stretch of the high street, and I noticed that other ones, two other units had allowances for master areas, so I was seeing how severe they were, because it was laid out quite well on the growth
And
plan.
did you present this to VT?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, one further thing. How did you describe workload trends with the use of property records to senior management? That sounds very exciting.
So can you speak that again?
So, workload trends, you
Right.
illustrated them to senior management using property records.
Right, okay, yeah, so that was to do with importing data from the actual workload into an Excel spreadsheet and then highlighting sort of spikes around sort of target data.
Oh, did you get to use graphs and charts in the chart wizard?
Yeah,
Oh, I love
that's it.
that. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Mandatories then. No measurement. Sorry, you're not going to get away with measurement. Right, IPMS office. You've mentioned that you've got an awareness of it. What will be published next after offices?
And the residential.
Residential, okay. If you were going to use IPMS 2, what is that roughly equivalent to in your own mind?
That's GIA.
GIA, okay. Right, let's now move on to the mandatories. Accounting principles. What's on a balance sheet?
Balance sheet
Yeah.
would, I think it's income, and assets as well.
Yeah.
Assets.
And
Um,
opposite of assets?
expense.
Liability.
Liabilities, yeah.
Okay. How do you contribute to the RV reduction target?
So obviously I have a target in my person each week. Obviously I settle cases and negotiate the valuations to hit that target.
Okay.
12,500.
Right. Okay. Describe your interaction with the client at the pub in Rickmansworth.
That one was when I was ascertaining obviously whether the rate of value was correct. So, but I didn't have any accounts on the system, so I approached them to visit the site, met the client directly, and obtained the accounts over
Okay.
AVD.
And was he okay about that?
Yeah, it was fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She outlined it would be his interest.
Yeah,
to give
and
to me.
confidential and all that.
Yeah.
All right then. Describe your role as lead caseworker in the Hertfordshire appeals.
That's regarding the Chancellor given a target of clearing all 90% of cases that were submitted before July 2013.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot outstanding, and with various caseworkers in CVS, and I was given those to negotiate in face-to-face meetings with the valuation office and
Yeah.
St Albans office.
Okay. Oh yeah. So, how did you have a lot to do in one meeting then?
Yeah, well, it was broken down into VT dates, so we was working through all the cases, the most imminent cases listed for tribunal, and going through. Obviously, I did research before I went there, looked through some of them were mine, some of the other surveyors, so refreshing myself on my own statement of case, on their statement of cases, and then obviously went through the case with the VO and through their systems as well.
Right. Okay. Sounds like a big job. Right. Conduct rules and ethics. Home Street. Tell me about the rules for individuals.
The rules for individuals include sort of interpretation of member, communication, CPD, high level service, competence, solvency, and a few others.
Okay. CPD. What are the CPD requirements after you're qualified?
It's 20 hours a year, 10 formal, 10 informal.
And every 3 years, what do you have to do?
You have to have a test on ethics.
Yeah. Okay. How do you check for conflicts of interest at CVS?
Well, when the case is allocated, it would be to ascertain there's no interaction with, any past sort of interaction with that.
So how do you actually do that?
Well, if a case was allocated to me, and I was personally familiar with the client, then I would say it would probably be better off this to be allocated to someone else to deal with, to avoid any conflict
So
of interest.
it's a bit ad hoc then. You don't have a database specifically for that or anything like that.
No, it wouldn't be no. But obviously, as a professional, I would
Yeah.
deal with that when if needed.
Right. Okay. Now what else have I got on rules of conduct? Oh, you read the client's money fact sheet. What did you learn from that?
That's just in terms of how to deal with clients' money and that a separate account is needed and clearly labelled.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And now you've said that you acted within your limitations in the airport hangar. How did you do that?
Well, that one was quite a large, sort of £800,000 assessment. And still ongoing at the moment, but obviously I've already spoke to my regional director and said that if this went to valuation tribunal, I'll be happy to do the report. I would be better for him to take the case himself with more experience and more experience in that type of property.
Was that difficult, or were you quite glad to get the help?
No, it's not been taken yet, but I've discussed it with my regional director. But yeah, I would be much more confident. It's also in the client's best interest to have more experience about dealing with it at that level.
Right. Okay. Now, thinking back to your critical analysis case, I want you to describe in detail how you have demonstrated one of the 5 ethical standards.
One of the 5 would be accountability.
No, the other ones.
All right. Transparency.
Okay, what are the 5 global ethical standards?
Proportionality.
No, that's the 5 principles for better regulation.
Right. Acts with a high level of service.
That's the ones, yeah.
Integrity,
Yeah.
trust in the profession, take responsibility.
Okay, so take 2 of those and tell me how you applied them in your advice to client.
Okay, I act with a high level of service. Like maintaining regular communication with the client, advising them when the different stages are taking place.
Yeah.
And then active responsibility would be speaking with the senior surveyor who came with the Developers Tribunal to act as advocate, as he'd be more better
Okay.
place to deal with that.
Yeah, good. So, one final question on this. What would you do if somebody turns up, say you've got your own practice and wants to pay a rather large bill with a suitcase full of cash?
Definitely wouldn't take that, as it would be seen.
Why not?
It wouldn't be professional to take
Yeah.
that kind of level.
Is there any... Would you be committing a criminal offence if you did?
I think it would be to take that.
All right, that's the end of my questioning. Norman, have you got anything that
No.
you'd like to... Don't, okay. Michael, have you got anything that you'd like to raise or come back on?
I think that's fine, thank
You
you.
think you're fine? Okay, excellent. Well, that brings your interview to a close. Only remains for me to tell you that the RSS will let you know in 5 working days via email if you've been successful. And if you've unfortunately been referred, it will be 21 working days before you get the referral report. Make sure you take your little card back to reception, they always. And thank you very much for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Job's a good one, right? Out ski.
That was 45 seconds under the hour. So that's
Not
the
too
hour.
bad, yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to come off at the last part.
Yeah.
It's all matter, right?
Yeah, when are you on? You're last, are you?
I'm after.
You're after Oliver. Yeah.
I'm after lunch.
Yeah, you are
aren't I?
after
So
lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's at 2 o'clock.
Your
isn't it?
starts at 2 sharp, yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, if you've got an urgent job to do, that's fine. Just make sure you don't disturb us when you're doing and froing. Right then, Michael, how was it for you?
Yeah, needs to brush up on case law evaluation, bit of planning. In terms of the actual presentation, I thought it was okay. You need to get a new flipboard though, because that was sliding around.
Oh, yeah, you're struggling to keep control
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah, I thought it went okay. Well, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not the knowledge base on some bits, but in terms of competence.
If that had been your final assessment interview, do you think you would have been passed or referred?
Probably referred. Well, yeah.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll talk about the presentation and the critical analysis, and then we'll do competency by competency.
Right.
Norman, would you say pass or refer or borderline?
Referred.
Yeah, I think so. There's
Yeah.
just too much level 1 to brush up on.
Yeah, that's-
you drop
yeah,
the ball
yeah,
too.
yeah.
You can drop the ball a couple of times, but
Yeah, there was,
And there's
yeah.
some things in here that I'm sure you know. I genuinely am
Yeah.
confident you know,
Yeah.
but you've
Just got,
you
yeah.
haven't got it at
Yeah.
your fingertips, and that is not good. I mean, I asked you a case that's in here that you definitely should
I know that Joan Lang one.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I knew.
I couldn't believe you didn't
I
know,
know
it,
it.
and I know you know it. And I'm thinking, well, there's no other way I can help you
Yeah,
on that.
yeah.
That's what I mean,
Yeah.
Michael. Now that is, I'm afraid, that's preparation.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I know. That's,
You can't wing that. That's
No.
preparation.
I mean, I know how busy you are, Michael, and you're very dedicated, you know, to being a brilliant caseworker for CVS, and you've got a lot of responsibility. But are you going to be able to give it your focus?
I've already said to Dean I'm having a week off before,
Right.
and I probably did sort of a couple of days of sort of a few hours here, a few
Yeah.
hours there.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm going to put the Friday off work and have the full week off before it. And I'm
Yeah.
going to say to Dean I'm doing that. I'll
Yeah.
work from home and won't put any RV on them if I have to. That's just if they won't. So yeah,
It's just something that
I know that's what I need because I can.
you do, because you're brilliant, you really are, but you're not showing it at the moment because you haven't had a chance to do that level
Yeah,
1 revision.
yeah, no, yeah.
And as a generality, this is as a document, particularly the critical analysis. There's nothing the matter with it, but it doesn't show you off to the best of what I think is your ability,
Right.
if I may say so.
Okay.
Do you agree with that? It's not that it's inadequate,
Yeah.
but there are. It's very good on breadth, but at times the depth could have been a little bit more.
Yeah.
So you're.
It's-
I know
it's a
there's a
student.
numbers, there's a size problem. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it was just choosing the VT case that was because
Yeah.
obviously I don't deal with any London, so I don't really deal with too many. Not I don't schedule schedules of rents
No,
to deal with.
no,
which is
well-
obviously what that's probably lacking is that
But,
much
but you
rental
see,
evidence.
where I was chasing you on the P&M,
I know you're talking
and
about-
whether that could have been, whether you went down the road of ascertaining how much the cost would be, and the case law on that, there's where the depth could have been.
Yeah.
Another paragraph, and you could have, a pithy paragraph,
Yeah.
you could have eased stuff elsewhere.
Right.
That's the criticism.
Well, let's talk about the presentation.
Yeah.
There was a big problem with the presentation, Michael.
What's that?
Really big problem. What have I always said is the only thing that really matters? Timing.
Right.